Okay,
Good.
welcome back, everyone. I would like to get this next session started. So, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for our last session for today, which is entitled the Net Traditional FEWS Frameworks. FEWS is Food, Energy, Water, Security. And I will be moderating this session. This session is 90 minutes from 1 to 2:30 Pacific daylight savings time. And on our panel today, we have Perry H. Charlie, who is a faculty at Dine College, and David Begay, who's an associate research professor at University of New Mexico. This session is focusing on how Dine traditional frameworks is specific to food, energy, water systems. The Navajo people have had a long history of understanding their society as having a deep connection to their physical environment. Dine culture, tradition, and identity are based on the ecosystems and sacred places of the Navajo land, the Nepikea. The Navajo respect for their ancestors, Mother Earth, Father Sky, speaks of a unique value and knowledge system very different from Western science and the Western systems of knowledge. The Dine knowledge system is rich and has an extreme value for us as scientists and engineers. We can greatly benefit from Navajo perspectives and all Indigenous perspectives in the communities that we work with in terms of the food, energy, water nexus and the framework that we work in. The Indigenous communities bring deep place-based understandings to the study of the complex natural and human systems, while also promoting sustainable solutions to today's most pressing issues. So I will now give the mic, I almost said the mic, the platform over to my student, Nikki Tooley, to introduce our esteemed panelists.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce our two presenters today for this afternoon session, Dine Traditional Frameworks. The first presenter is Dr. David Begay. He is a member of the Navajo Nation. He received his Bachelor's of Arts and Master's of Arts from the University of Arizona in political science with a concentration in policy, analysis, and Indian policy, and law studies. He received his PhD from the California Institute of Interral Studies, located in San Francisco, California, with a concentration in Indigenous education and application of traditional knowledge. Dr. Begay is adjunct faculty at Northern Arizona University, located in Flagstaff, Arizona, in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. He is VP for the Indigenous Education Institute, located in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and works with the University of California, Berkeley Space Sciences Laboratory through a grant from the National Science Foundation. He also works with the University of Notre Dame through a grant with the National Aeronautics Space Administration. Dr. Begay is a cultural consultant to many organizations and corporations, both in the United States and internationally. He is raised with a deep cultural knowledge, tradition, and of his people. Our second presenter today is Perry H. Charlie. He is a member of the Navajo Nation as well. He is an executive director and senior scientist at Dine College on the Shamrock campus. Mr. Charlie has over 40 years of experience in education and research with the Dine Environmental Institute Research and Outreach in the areas of environmental and public health studies, psychosocial impact, reclamation, remedial, and legislative activities on impacts resulting from past nuclear industries on Navajo lands. As a principal investigator and Native cultural advisor of research projects, He applies traditional ecological knowledge, employing traditional values, concepts, and applications to Western education curriculum and research strategies. For the past 25 years, he has been instrumental in the development of scientific and medical terminologies into Diné glossaries. His work has involved community organizing on the Navajo Nation, working with stakeholders and partners to advance social, environmental, and economic justice, to promote sustainability and positive changes through grassroots campaigns. Mr. Charlie has also served on the U.S. EPA advisory committees. He was the commissioner for the Diné Uranium Remediation Advisory Mission on the Navajo Nation Genetics Policy Development Council, as well as he has served as the National Academy of Sciences Committee on improving practices for regulating and managing low activity radioactive waste. He has also been a distinguished fellow with the Quality of Education for Minorities and with the Leadership Development Institute for Tribal Colleges and University Programs. Mr. Charlie, professionally and academically, refers to himself as a simple Diné sheep herder with a little more education. Thank you, Dr. Begay and Mr. Charlie, for sharing your time and knowledge with us today.
Okay, thank you. Again, this is Perry. In Navajo, you're not supposed to name yourself or else your ear will shrivel up and fall off. So I won't mention my name, but there's a good handsome man to the left, the right of your screen and the left side. So Shishna Ash, my cousin. We thank you and we honor and appreciate this time. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, I am a product of the BIA boarding school systems. And let me start with that. I spent my formal years at the tender age of 5 years where I was placed in the boarding school system. And I experienced all of the harshness that is often equated in literature, in news media, and whatnot. And it was a place that was foreign to me. The greatest concept within that period of time was to void out all of my identity as a Diné person and to place and implant the English language into my being. And of course, as you all know, or most of you know, that didn't happen. I managed to retain my identity and my language to the point now where I use it in my research projects. After a few episodes of running away from a nearby boarding school, by the way, they never caught me, and I had to cross a major river, the San Juan River. But I was always brought back, and because of that, I was transferred to another Indian school, an Indian placement school called Intermountain Indian School. That's about 750 miles from my homeland. And interestingly enough, I tended to enjoy that environment. Punishment wasn't as harsh, and I got to know a lot more about that foreign concept called English education. Next slide. Next slide. I want to talk about some things that were brought to our attention by the team here, the COVID team. And go back to the other one. I was asked to elaborate on these questions here, and I won't go into detail, but the point was for us to look at the spirituality of the Nepazad, the Diné language, and how it plays a vital role in food, water systems. What are the barriers and what are some of the key pointers in glossary development, in making sure that our elders understand the concept of the science, the medical portion, the technical jargon that we are so used to. How do you develop at that point in time? So let's go to the next slide. All of these examples here are dictated into this picture, and on the next slide. This is the Navajo Foundation of Life, the Navajo Wedding Basket. This is the concept of not only the emergent story, but also the family unit itself through wedding. Some of the principal players that is involved in it, the grandparents, both sets of grandparents, the mother, the father, the uncles, whoever is in there, the aunts that sustains and comprises of the Navajo society. And off to the left, you say how the Navajo language or words are expressed. That the Navajo culture talks and praise and chants the landscape into their beings. This is the animating power of our language that is inherent into the spoken and the sacred, the spirituality of words that connects the breath of each Dene to the breath of the world. This is the concept. It is creative, it designs, it builds, it invents. It's very artistic. The Dene language invests their homeland with the presence through the active verb-based processes of talking the land. What I'm saying is it names places, it sings its virtues, and it tells its stories. This is the sacredness and the oneness, the interconnection between the Dene and the environment, the concept of Earth Mother and the Father Sky concept. So our language is very highly descriptive of natural places, and it plays special attention to the way of the event or place we are describing in this perpetual state of motion. This verb-based nature of our language is also connected, as I said a while ago, to the native and the Navajo, and this is what Dave is going to be talking about, cosmological belief that we live in an interrelational concept with the living world in a perpetual creative motion, the spirituality part. So that's the power and the sacredness. We just don't invent words. There has to be quite a bit of interaction between our traditional folks, our traditional practitioners, our cultural advisors. When you go into the realms of areas where there's no words for certain things, there's no concept. Yesterday, it was brought Sunny Dooley that we don't have a word for COVID-19. A mistake was made where we refer to it as the Kosensai, big cough. And that's likened to the Spanish flu. It is likened to pneumonia, where there are treatment, there are healing practices, and there are cures. But the COVID-19, the virus itself, has no words for it. So how can our Navajo people look at this virus and have any type of conception and understanding of its power? And see, that's a challenge in itself. And so it goes into other areas like energy, food, water. There are certain things that we we often don't think of when we work as scientists from the Western concept of working with Native American communities. Next slide. Okay, very briefly, the Navajo language is held sacred, as I said, but by my people, the Dine. In Navajo culture and our tradition, that the spoken word is powerful and it becomes a reality. And we must all be mindful and careful of what is spoken. Therein is the essence of whether you're gonna disrupt this concept of Huizhong. Huizhong is, it encompasses the whole essence of the Dene concept of balance and beauty, harmony, coexisting with nature, with things around it, the negative and the positive, the good and the bad. It's referred to as Huizhong. It's our idea of natural beauty and dwelling within that concept. So the word, our words are very, very powerful and becomes a reality. So when we go into new areas, scientific areas, projects, for example, FEWS, when terminologies and glossaries are developed, it has to be done within the context of positive thinking, hope, and compassion. It fulfills the mission of harmony, healing, and restoration into the concept of the beauty way. So I use the other concept. I've been very, very integral in looking at this concept of integrating US EPA's and US government's concept of the SERPA cleanup of contaminated lands. The young lady who introduced me told me that I have quite a number of experience in cleanup of radioactively contaminated lands. It has been a challenge, but we're beginning to see the results of creating the Nebuza, the spirituality part. Next slide. Okay, let me give you an example of using the story of the mythical monsters, the trip of the twins as they sought their father, the sun, in Navajo, and let's tie it in with the concept of the discovery of uranium, the discovery of radioactivity back in 1896. This concept of radioactivity at that time, we were not aware of what we were going to get ourselves involved in. So I highlighted that in red. This concept, we had no words, we had no thoughts, and no concept of this thing called radiation and some of its elements, the alpha, the beta, and many of the other particulates, radon, the gas itself. So we call it Naye, and it's powerful, and it can wreak evil and disharmony and harmony to the human being.
Perry, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Perry tohatits ata.
Perhaps Dr. Begay would like to speak while we wait for Perry to come back on, or would that be unorthodox?
Dr. Begay, Perry A. Beshbehane Hashitza, Asha Kone Tahanzi, Perry Baba Dates.
I had to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Oh, Ditza.
Okay, good. All right. I want to thank everybody that's organizing this conference for inviting me. Harry Charlie called me one day and asked me if I could present with him. And so I agreed, and here I am. Ito na enschlenige ya maidiski enschle to kia ane bashishin ishine dashichido shkanto yatashinada. I just introduced myself by my clan. It's one of those cultural expectations. Whenever you talk to other Native people, Navajo people, in this case, you introduce yourself, not only to your relatives, but also your relationship to everything out there, including the spirit, the spiritual world. And so I want to take this teaching into consideration to express myself here as a starter. I guess the best way to go about this now is to go to my slide. My slide starts with the Mother Earth, Father Sky sand painting. That one, right. I think what we have here is many things. What you're looking at here is an old sand painting that goes back hundreds of years. And it creates an ancient worldview, how the traditional Navajo over the years looked at the world, and also how they viewed the human participants in this world. When I talk to my elders, most of them pass on. They say that the human is a mere participant of a much bigger universe. And Earth is an integral part of this universe. And this knowledge, whether expressed or sung through these traditional stories, it continues to this day. I think Navajo people have gone through a tremendous acculturation and assimilation. Most of the people living on and off the reservation are young. This knowledge that I'm talking about, they still have a feeling for it. And by intuition, they feel it. And you don't have to explain a lot of things because it's like in their genes. And so they can relate to these ancient ways of knowledge. And when you compare, juxtapose Euro-American knowledge with or native or indigenous knowledge. It's really different. It's like apple and oranges, and it I just never ceases to amaze me how we still are able to communicate with this vast differences. Um, so I'm in Flagstaff, so if you hear a siren, that means there's a siren truck going by, and so this is where I ended up, and here I am, and yeah, and just a little introduction. I'm in my 70s. I retired some time ago, and I told everybody, this is it for me. I've been to many places, including the college. I used to be a faculty there at one time, uh, an academic dean, academic vice president, assistant to the president, and then after I retired, University of New Mexico recruited me in the College of Medicine and Pharmacy. So that's where I'm at. About half-time contract. That's all I wanted. And then the other half, NASA, and recruited me, and they out of Goddard Space Flight Center over by DC, and I've been with them for some years now, and about 20 years, and they don't want me to go for a while. Anyway, that's some of the latest things I'm doing, and so these things I'm just doing, as on my own time. I like to think that I'm done and kind of just doing this as as my interest area. Going back to this sand painting, on the right side is the Mother Earth sand painting. It shows all the plants, the important food, since food is a part of this conference. And co-innovation of food, energy, and water. And so I figure I put this sand painting in here because it talks about the food of a long time ago that people use. The corn, the squash, and the beans. I think indigenous people of Central America, South America, other people in the United States, all the way to the East Coast, they all relied on these three food items. And Navajo was not different. They relied heavily on these food items. And so whole culture, whole system of knowledge developed from these food sources. And you could go into the nutritional thing, and that's beyond the scope of this presentation. If you look at the left side, that's sand painting of Father Sky. It's the universe, where it depicts some of the main planets, the big star, and there's 12 constellations. Main constellation that serves like the backbone of Navajo constellation. These are based on observational knowledge, much like scientific knowledge, observational knowledge. It's not something that was like thrown together by some mysterious imagination. These are actual movement of stars and constellations that happen throughout the season. And so these knowledge have been passed on through the generation, and some of it is still being talked about. And there much of this knowledge are in the songs, traditional songs today. next slide. Maybe you can go on to the next slide. On the right side there, I drew, try to draw an image of the earth, the four sacred mountains that Navajos talk about, the east, the southwest, and north sacred mountain, and then also the constellations. And the reason why I showed this is to show Mother Earth and Father Sky image, a consciousness that's carried by traditional people over the years. Implicit in this indigenous thinking is the perception that all things are naturally interconnected, meaning everything works together as a whole and undivided. This is really big, what I just said. All things are naturally interconnected. Everything works together as a whole and undivided. I noticed that in your agenda, it says water is life, shared challenges, shared understanding, and shared solution. And the other one that I was reading is this conference is to train students to co-design with indigenous communities using systems thinking. Systems. Is there any such thing as systems thinking in Navajo? I think you have to go back to this perception that all things are naturally interconnected and everything works together. It's holistic, and these things that I'm talking about, the different perceptions, it comes through the language. This is expressed in so many different ways without a Navajo saying that all things are interconnected, and without a Navajo saying that. It just comes through the language in so many dimensions. It becomes really clear, and so it's just systemic, and it's also organic. It's they think of this system as alive, and it's also ecological. Within this undivided ecological wholeness, everything is considered living. And with this understanding, those things considered not alive by Western standards are alive through its interconnectivity with those living. So this, I think, is one of the major differences. Because when you juxtapose Euro-American thinking with Navajo, there's many differences. For example, the separation of man and nature. Since water is a part of the topic here, water is life. In the Navajo way of looking at things as far as water is concerned, man is not separate from water, and so is every living thing. Everything is living. It's a living system of interrelationship with man as an integral part of the whole. I think this is really, really big. And I think that some of the things that goes on in the universities and in the world of science, especially the tool that are used. I think it was mentioned earlier. When a native person goes to the university, they have to follow these tools, the scientific method. If you ask, a scientist, without the scientific method, can you think? Can you talk about some of these things without the scientific method? It's hard for them to do that. Because I tried that, many times, and it didn't go too far. And it's if you take away their tool, I think if you reverse the process, if you ask a native person, take away the spirituality, the tool by which native people think, if you take away the spirituality, they have really nothing to stand by. Everything is sort of like dissected. And so it's hard for them to think, outside their box. And if you follow the Western system, they break down everything down to the smallest common denominator. You look at the human flesh, look at the tissues, and then the molecules and the atoms, and then you go beyond the atoms. You matter disappears. You look at the protons and the neutrons, electrons. You go beyond the subatomic particles, and you keep going down, all the way down to the quartz, the tiniest particle. You go beyond that. Everything seems to be interconnected. It seems to be what I'm hearing from the quantum physicists that I work with and quantum astrophysicists, that it's a unified field of energy. Pretty much what the Navajos are saying, that everything is interconnected. If you think of the energy as everything, because Navajo also think that everything out there is energy. Everything has energy, and everything has vibration. Everything is movement. And so so when you think about how Navajo think about these things, they're sort of like saying the same thing, but in a different language. That's the way I think about it. Right now, I think science is at a standstill. They haven't developed a language to go beyond these subatomic particles. No language has been developed yet, to talk about this universal flux, how everything, is working together. And so we just can only say that, that everything seems to be a lot of energy interconnections out there. That's where we're at. And pretty much, I think this is what, a lot of the native people say the same thing, that that these things are all interconnected. So when it comes down to thinking about these things and juxtaposing them, it's between Euro-American and Native knowledge. It's pretty wide apart. It's hard, trying to talk about these things. There's, when you go to the university, the body and the mind are separated. In the native world, the unity of the body and the mind is important. There's unity there. The unity of matter and spirit is important in the native world. The separation of matter and spirit is a part of the Euro-American world. The separation of inanimate and animate. Everything in the universe is animate in the native world. And so it's pretty hard to get native people to think any to think outside spirituality. So when when a native person goes to the university, something central that's about that person's worldview, something that's, you know, that makes that heart tick in the native person is ticking out. The university says you can't think like that. You can't put spirituality in the world of science. You have to change your language. That they don't say, you know, you take it away and put it away forever. You know, they just say you just can't do it here. So I think for Native people, what I tell Native people is just learn it the way of the science. You know, study it like science wants you to learn it. And that means, you know, you objectify everything. Water's over there. You give it a scientific name. You just call it hydrogen, oxygen. H2O. You don't say water is life because that's a little bit too strong. You know, but leave it over there, and it's hydrogen and oxygen. That's all it is. It's an element. The human is over here. You subject, object, you know, methodology. In the native world, they can't think like that, especially among the traditional people in the communities. They say water is life. We are water, you know. Whole body is water. That's how they think. And I think, you know, a lot of people will agree to that. You know, most of the body is water. And, you know, there's a traditional man, you know, I told him about how the Western knowledge is divided into categories, and he asked me, if I take away this water bottle, he says, from you, how long do you think, you know, you're gonna last? The life that, you know, that you're enjoying, it's going to dry up. It's just be a matter of days. You're going to fall over, you know. That water is, you know, what, you know, gives you life. That which, you know, precedes life is water. Water isn't that important. You know, you can't separate it in the native mind. You know, how can you think any other way? He told me. You know, that's not reality. And so this is something that you would encounter in the native world. I think this is, you know, my experience working with traditional people, that, you know, that there's just a certain way of looking at things. And so I didn't want to go into, you know, any of these things that we're talking about. It's very, you can go into any one area and talk about it for a whole day easily. And I don't want to do that, and this presentation is beyond the scope of these things, that some of these things that I'm bringing up just for thinking purpose. Next slide. Yeah, I think if you look at the general definition of ecology, you know, it talks about the interrelationship of organism and how it's connected with the environment, and it, you know, it's also dependent on what you're looking at. It's also, you know, goes into the physical, chemical, and biological condition of the environment and their effect on different organisms. So this is sort of like the general definition that people use to talk about ecology, because I think a lot of the things that the Native people, Navajo people talk about can be talked about through a lot better, and maybe a lot more simpler through, you know, some of these terms to get to the crux of some of these differences and similarities between Euro-American knowledge and Navajo knowledge. Next slide. As far as traditional perspective is concerned, I think it's accumulation of holistic interrelated knowledge, belief and practice, and passed down through the generations through traditional song and stories. And you have to keep looking at things holistically. There's an unbroken relationship between everything, between plants, in this case, maybe going back to your agenda, food, the energy, and all of that. It's holistically understood and undivided. That if you put everything through the notion of holistic interrelationship of all things, then you're looking at, then I think you're beginning to look at things through the lens of the Navajo mind or the native mind. Next slide. This is one slide that I wanted to show because I think there's a major difference in your agenda. You say that water is life. In the Navajo thinking, if you use the Navajo thinking, water is life, they would understand that, and they would know what that would mean. But in the Euro-American scientific world, water is abiotic. It's not living. Water is not life. So is the air, the sunlight, the soil, and other minerals. And so this is, what science teaches. Science is saying water is dead. It's not living. Navajo is saying water is living. Water is life. So there's a major difference. And so I think students have to think about these things. And so for science teachers, science students, I think when you go to these universities, the science classroom, you have to just learn it as science. And then when you come back to the traditional thinking, traditional community where life and water is interconnected, then you have to live that world and talk that world. And I think trying to pull the two together would be very hard to do, because what I'm talking about is not something that's that people know about these things. The Native American world, it's a different world. So if you take this intuitive knowledge of the Native American world and you go into the university where almost nobody thinks like the way you think, then you have some challenges ahead of you. Nobody will understand you. You're out of this world. That's how they will look at it. And if you go all the way and you start working on your thesis or dissertation, you're going to have very little support. Or you gotta have the right people to support you. So rather than fighting the system, just learn the system of the scientific world, and come back and then work on your own. and 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 talk about these similarities, and there's major differences. You know, some people try to integrate them. I just don't think that's going to happen. But you can juxtapose it, you can compare it, do comparative analysis and talk about the differences. I think that's as much as you can do. Next slide, I might be on my last slide. Hello. Oh, there, yeah, I think that was my last slide. And maybe Perry Charlie's back on the line. Is he back on the line?
Perry Charlie,
No, I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Okay,
I'm here.
good. All right. Shanale.
Let's go to the next slide here. Let me finish off real quick. I apologize, you guys. I live in a very remote area. It's beautiful. There's a lot of trees around me, and I live a secluded life. But as far as technology, it interferes. I never had access to internet and Wi-Fi until the COVID came in. And I realize now what a hindrance electronic media is and devices. So it cuts off. I'm less on the line in terms of what I can get. The other problem is, as you see it on here, Kara's machine is non-Navajo. Those are in Navajo fonts. So what I'm trying to show is I talk a little bit about alpha, beta, gamma, atom, and I use a description, the site removal site evaluation that is done on Superfund and CERCLA terminology in terms of part of the risk assessment strategies. These are words that we are not familiar with in the Navajo language. We could not convey, we could not even think of what they meant when scientists comes into our midst and translators came into our midst and they try to convey the scientific part, the technicality part. So we as glossary developers, we had to go in and, as I mentioned earlier, the Navajo Nation is language is verb-based and very descriptive, very artistic. So we had to come together. In order to develop glossaries, you have to know about the different variations of the spoken language that is influenced by dialects. To the west by Tuba City, they are influenced by the Hopi, the Wallapais, the Havasupais, as well as the Anglos. Where I live, we have the Southern Utes, the White Mesa Utes, the Ute Mountain Utes, the Mescalero Apaches, the Jicarilla Apaches, and other ethnic groups. So the way we describe things varies. So somebody who develops glossaries has to be cognizant of this. Next slide. I apologize again for the gibberish there. It's Navajo fonts is very intricate. I think that's why they were never able to translate the Navajo codes. A few years ago, I started working on glossary development in terms of genetic terminologies, and it became pretty complex. When I was doing the 2002 moratorium came in, there was a moratorium on genetic research on the Navajo reservation. So I had to put a stop to this, and I left it idle for many years. Next slide. Okay, it wasn't until last year, the Navajo Nation Council opted to look at possibilities of reopening the genetic research on Navajo. And Dr. Begay and I, we are distinguished members of this council here. And it was placed upon my shoulder with my team of linguistics and language developers. We started looking at very detailed, going into the heart of a human cell, the cytoplasm, even beyond that, into the nucleus of human genetics, the cell itself, and we started naming them. And you see down below the glossary in Navajo. And then something unique that we also do is for translators to properly pronounce certain things. We back translate the NEP version, or the NEP language, the NEP glossary back into English. So when you do this, you find out real quickly that the spoken English language is spoken backwards. Navajos are different. So it's a verb-based language. We get to the point, in other words. So, so you can see the variations there. Next slide. This will be available online. By the way, we are going into our second phase of doing this. It's a huge volume. We're going to post them online so people can have access to this. So the other thing is, if you endeavor to go into translating anything, like in the subject at hand, the topics that we're discussing, food, energy, and water, you need to have these two groups. The first one is a translator. They're equipped with certain skills, linguistic skills. They have knowledge of grammar. They have knowledge of thoughts presented in that language, but they don't require special skills because everything is written out for them and they just translate it. On the other token, a Dine interpreter, he translates the spoken words in terms of whatever grammatical knowledge he has, from which he will interpret. That includes the science, the medical, the traditional, and other technical and specialized field, like genetics, like nutrition. Just 2 weeks ago, we did 26 slides and a whole set of glossary development in dealing with COVID-19. It hasn't been done, and we did that. So it will be available. It was a real tough undertaking. So an interpreter goes beyond just having, he has to speak, read, and write the Dene language proficiently. And he has to be knowledgeable of the dialects that influences how words are spoken and pronounced. So he knows and he has to know the tradition, the culture, the ceremonial usage of esoteric language. There are some language that is only used in the medicine circle. So I, as an interpreter, as a developer of glossary, I must be able to gain and retain respect of our traditional practitioner, the medicine man, the chatters, the cultural and traditional advisors. So if you don't have this, if you don't have their backing, you're not going anywhere. This is what makes the job more challenging. So it requires all these special skills. So when you go into language development, make sure that you have knowledge and you have these types of people in your workforce or on your team. Next slide. All right. Well, the language I was once forbidden to speak in the sacred language of the Dine. In World War II, saved our nation, the United States. And now, even with COVID, it has the power in uranium impacts in the Gold Key mine spill. Rather than face the consequences of chronic psychosocial impact, if we use our language, if we use our native language, and we develop these concepts, these words, these glossaries, the terminologies from the various technical fields of the Western science, it can restore harmony and balance to our Native American culture and our lands. And as David so eloquently pointed out and described, our interconnectedness with our relatives, the wings that, the beings with wings, those that crawl, the four-legged creatures, those that swim, the rivers and the seas, we're all interconnected. There is balance, there's harmony. A place of beauty, we walk in beauty. So we are at harmony. And I like to use that word that health physicists use. We are at equilibrium with our environment. Next slide. So we go through this process. We divide, all the red areas are in my area. The ones that are in black are areas that we communicate with from the Western perspective. And this is based on the circle concept, risk assessment, environmental and ecological risk assessment leading into human health risk assessment. And certainly you're going to be doing some of that in FEWS, food, energy, and water system, the project itself. So you're going to have to come up with a strategy on how to use the usage and the proper application of native language and glossary. And how do you do that? How do you apply that? And that's what I use in the traditional consultation and approval was almost non-existent. Now I work with those three societies there, the Dene Hatati Association, the Navajo Medicine Men Association, and the Dene Spiritual Society. So those are critical components. Our elders, you need to have their input. You need to have their blessing, their acceptance, because there are certain words, certain expressions that you may use that are not allowable because it's only driven by chants, by prayers, by rituals, and in certain ceremonies. So you have to protect that knowledge. We just can't arbitrarily use that. So, and towards the end, we start incorporating traditional knowledge and the Dene Lifeway model. Dave showed you a lot of these models there, the concept behind the interconnectedness. Those are contained in those Navajo laws there. So soon we're going to have one that is very specific to genetics. So that's the route that we are going, the power and the sacredness of our language in projects that deal with the elements of life, water being one of them, air is another one. So food that is tied to lands, Mother Earth concept, and heat, the sun. Next slide. All right, that's it. I appreciate this, and again, I had to reboot my whole system to get back online, but here I am. I love doing these workshops. I just did one last week with a group of people from Southern Portland. So these are challenges, and it's taken me a long ways to integrate traditional knowledge into Western science concept. And let's continue that because there's much that can be done in incorporating that. Risk assessments will be much better implemented, the determinations of impact would really be advantageous to Native American communities. The EIS and the environmental assessment reports will be on the behavior of Navajo and the Native American communities throughout the nation and certainly the world. So this is why it's so important. Language is so important. If we forget that, if we forget to integrate that in any of our research projects, we are forgetting the voice of the people who are truly impacted. And with that, I complete my presentation. Thank you.
Shanale, Che, Kwan, Jonagon, the Hain Ziggy, saw that Lady Gito, Nantin, I see, Ile, Adeshi, not the kid, Bahato. Thank you to my leaders here. I acknowledge my grandfathers and their teachings, which is extremely valuable. And I want to thank them and acknowledge their presence and their teachings here today. At this time, we'd like to open up for Q&A. We have about 20 minutes for Q&A. And I have several questions and comments that were put into the chat box. And I just want to read a few of them, and then hopefully it will stimulate some more discussion. Somebody said this world would be such a better place if we all had this world view. And another individual said that they enjoy reclaiming of all these new ideas of systems thinking, body, mind, unity to the immemorial wisdom of Native peoples. Another person said, I wonder how we can acknowledge the immemorial origins of the ideas that Dr. Begay is addressing in their own work. Is there any resources that they can use? How can they teach their students to acknowledge this correctly without cultural appropriation or fatiguing the speakers? Dr. Begay and Perry, Charlie, do you have any answers to that question?
I guess I can start.
Excuse me, remember, if you are not a speaker, please put your mic on mute.
For a variety of reasons, one example is a good idea.
Going back to your agenda that was sent out, training students to co-design with the indigenous communities using systems thinking. People have different definition of system thinking. In the Navajo worldview that Mr. Charlie presented through the Navajo basket, it talks about cycles and cycles within cycles. And so it talks about, for example, the lunar cycle, which is really a monthly cycle. It's implicit in the basket, and also the solar cycle. And that basket also depicts the summer solstice and the equinoxes. And so what you see in there in the cycle, there's a process going on. And in this case, it's a natural cosmic process. The word process has an order in Navajo, we have a word, you know, that describes that order. You know, that everything is naturally ordered perfectly. And so it goes through that cycle and it provides direction. And that direction is consistent and stable. You know, for example, the sun, when it comes up before noon, it doesn't go back. It will never do that. It will continue. And then the next day will continue. Next day will continue year after year. It's stable. But what you see in there is a process and an order and a direction. And so in the native mind, they look at the process, the order, and the direction. And if you follow that direction, if you design it, you know, as your agenda says, co-design. What you will see is, in this case, cycles within cycles. And you can take that and you can start to visualize, you know, a big circle and then smaller circles, smaller circles, smaller circles. And then pretty soon you start to see, if you think mathematically, what you'll see is a fractal matrix. You can put, you know, you can even put colors in there. Using the Navajo color, white, turquoise, yellow, and black. What you'll see is a system designed by nature, and using that system as a construction of the human mind to develop something like a model by which to plan to do things. Then that's, you know, what, you know, comes out of that system. Now, these songs that we're talking about, that's how they're designed. And so they follow that order. That's why they know so many songs. Some of these traditional people, you know, you got to have, sometimes I think, you know, how in the world can you have that kind of mind, you know, memory? And it's, you know, in their mind, they're following an order, an orderly process. And it's coming from nature. So what they're doing is nature's knowledge and applying it to contemporary time. I did that. When I was working for the Net College, you know, the president of the college called me in one time. He said, I want to reassign you from the vice president to do research for us. Don't go copy anybody, nobody. There's all kinds of planning model out there. Develop one from the Navajo mind. So that's what I did. I developed a process model by which to engage the whole college community, and we developed a model using some of the Western conventional planning model and terminology. So it's like but using the NEM model. It's a system. We use what we've seen as we follow these processes that are traditionally understood. What we've seen on paper is, you know, a fractal matrix system, you know, and so it's out there. If you want to think system, it's out there. And, you know, you just have to, you know, use your brain, I think, to a large extent. I think as far as working with the university, the psychology department over here, and the body department over here, the mind and body department, I know they're going to stay separate. You know, they're going to talk, but they're going to stay separate because that's the way of the university. I think the whole world is hurting right now, especially with the climate changes, and you know, everything is changing. In the world of the Native American, you know, one little effect will affect all, you know, like cause and effect. You do something here, it's not just going to, you know, affect something locally right there within certain feet, and it's, you know, it's going to, you know, affect everything. You know, pretty much like, you know, the understanding of the gravity and the thinking. If you drop an apple, you know, nature's law, gravitational law will take over. That apple will drop. In the science world and the mathematical world, you can put equation to it. You can use different method. You can use the Einstein's, you know, equation to understand that. You know, you can use Newtonian, you know, equation to understand it, or other, you know, equation to understand it. It's all mathematical. But if you go to a native person, they'll tell you, you know, that's too simple. You know, it's the whole universe acting. That's what you're seeing. When you see that apple drop, it's the universe acting. It's a universal law that, you know, that it's the interconnection, this energy of flux that's, you know, that's all over, all encompassing, and the human is a part of this flux. Because everything is moving in process. And so using that, some of this knowledge that, you know, something that happens over here will affect other parts of the world. And I think that's what we're experiencing with this climate change. You know, it's, you know, we're destroying ourselves. And I think, you know, some of this knowledge, when it comes down to system, it's talking about interrelationship. You know, you got to think beyond the individual pieces, the individual aspects of things, and, you know, look at it holistically. You know, go outside the box. And so the native has some of this knowledge. And I think, you know, even non-native has some of this knowledge. You know, even the Western science has some of this knowledge. The holistic, you know, the branch of science that thinks holistically, you know, outside the classic science and, you know, outside the quantum, you know, scientists. This, you know, and so it's out there. You know, I think it's a matter of connecting with these resources, and then when you come down to it, the way you understand it individually, the one that can be communicated out there with your own research, I think that's not cultural appropriation. I think that's like, you know, designing something that will serve mankind. You know, they're hurting now. You know, this will allow you to look at yourself, introspection. You know, and looking beyond the human, looking at the environment. You know, as far as the native is concerned, the environment is you. You're looking at yourself. When you look at the stars, when you look at the Pleiades, you know, the constellation Pleiades, that's your ancient past. You're looking at your past and you're looking at yourself. They're not out there. You are one and the same. it's a different way of looking at things. And so I think, you know, this one says, this agenda I'm looking at says, it talks about innovation, indigenous co-innovation, you know, innovation. You know, I think it's, you know, it's a lot comes back down to the individual and working with people and doing it right. A lot of people think that, you know, that this knowledge is so simple that you can go to any Native community, and, you know, some people do that. They come up and they tell, you know, they tell the Native people, you know, tell me all about Native knowledge. Do it all in 5 minutes. It's not going to happen. Be like me going over to a physics department in the university and telling, you know, one of the professors, you know, tell me all about physics, and tell it to me in the language that I would understand in 5 minutes. They would laugh about me. And same thing, you know, with cultural knowledge. It's, you know, it's knowledge that that has been earned, passed on through the generation, very deep, you know, when you come down to it. And so a lot of this knowledge, I think, you know, the generation of my generation, I think this might be the only generation that has, you know, both knowledge, the English and also the cultural knowledge, you know, because my kids are different. They're into engineer, and, you know, some of them are, you know, working with these surgeon doctors, and, you know, it's a different world for them. And you know, as much as I speak the language, the Navajo is different. It's just, you know, we just change. And so my generation, Perry's generation, you know, we're probably, you know, sort of like the last of the Mohegans or something like that, and, you know. Okay, I think I said enough.
Dr. Begay. We have some questions that others want to ask. Rather than me asking them to promote the human connection over this virtual platform, I would like to have you ask the question. So I'm gonna point to Christopher Yazzie. He has a question, and Christopher, could you go ahead and ask your question?
I'm also sending out the poll for everyone. Thanks.
Oh, Christopher Yazzie said he doesn't have a mic. So I'll just go ahead and ask his question for Mr. Charlie. In your work with bringing science, technology, and solutions to cleaning up uranium mines and waste using the process flow you shared, is there a formal process to approaching traditional practitioners with the ideas that were formulated as possible solutions? Or was approaching traditional practitioners more informal, like talk to several of them one-on-one and see what the general consensus is? Are the traditional practitioner societies you named organized to work on these issues and help in solution-making decisions?
Okay, thank you, Christopher. She doesn't I don't know how to address you, but one thing that Dr. Begay mentioned and alluded on is the Navajo paradigm of which is comprised of, and it includes of constant motion and flux, and he used that that is in the existent in our society, in our culture, that consists of energy waves, interrelationship, and we use that very often. All things being animate, space, place, renewal, and all things imbued with spirit. That was the essence of what he kind of alluded to. One thing that you need to do is when you talk about something that is very detrimental. It affected a community. COVID-19, the gold King mine spill, uranium, and you name it. It was very, very acute. So how to address that becomes a vital part of risk assessment strategies. As a scientist who endeavors to clean up contaminated waste on Navajo lands, there's over millions of tons of radioactive waste that is still on Navajo. And I'm charged with the cleanup of those to do assessment. A critical component under risk assessment is risk communication. And that's what you're talking about. Is it a formal dialogue? Well, you start it at the earliest beginning before you even develop your scope of work, before you even develop a hypothesis, much less your personnel and your budget. You go and talk to the community, because in the community itself, you will have liaisons, if you will, traditional people, cultural people, somebody who may not be an elected official, but he will be reviewed as an elder. People will recognize him as a leader, an atani, a chief, if you may call. And they are the ones that have ties, they have knowledge to their environment. It could be a practitioner, it could be an advisor, it could be somebody who is revered. That's who you need to start working with. You need to get his opinion, you need to start working with him. And then you start working with the community and that individual or individuals, and develop your game plan on addressing this toxin that is affecting the community. When you start looking at cleanup strategies in more detail, that's when the traditional practitioner comes in. It could be informal. I've done both. I have talked to them one-on-one when I recognize them, or I could present my ideas and my plans in their meetings. I would get on their agenda and I would present what I propose to do, so they could discuss it and they could advise me on certain points that I may not see, that I may be lacking. And they bless me with my project, and that's where the implementation comes. Because let me give you an example: mine waste. That was in your question. How do you deal with mine waste? A lot of communities opt to say, take it off our land. It's affected us too much. Take it off somewhere to Whit, to Rocky Flats, to the Salt Lake flat grounds for burial. But the medicine people frown upon that. This element, the radioactivity, the waste itself, the ore, the prot ore that is lingering out there that has affected so many and so much, it came from the earth. You need to replace it there. You need to go and bury it back into earth. There are proper ceremonies, there are proper rituals that needs to be done before you place it back. That is the way of doing native science, integrated that into design criteria, sloping, covers, how much cover do you need for radon attenuation. All these things are involved. You intermesh Western science with Native American or Dene science. So it's a continued process throughout. And our medicine people, our cultural advisors are involved in all of this. So it's that constant motion, the spirituality is in there, that interconnectedness. You're asking the earth that we are replacing, we are giving you back what we took from you without proper consideration, and we apologize. See, that's the spirituality part. So that's what we do. So, and Dave is so right. You know, you just don't arbitrarily use water without realizing that the human person, the five-fingered ones, they are life itself. So it's not an inanimate thing. Air isn't, water isn't, land isn't, the sun isn't. It's part of us. So you have to consult at the earliest beginning to properly design your research projects, your cleanup projects, whatever the case may be. Thank you.
Those are really important things to think about in terms of ensuring that in working with communities that we train our students to start working with communities early to formulate those research questions. So we're at the end of our session. It's 2:34, and I want to thank the speakers, Dr. Begay and Mr. Charlie. And Yale is sharing a poll right now, and I asked for your feedback on this session. Thank you for your questions. And I'll go ahead and give the platform back over to Alice.
Or I think Cara.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for Carlotta. Thank you to Carlotta for moderating, and to Nikki Tully for introducing our speakers. And thank you to our speakers, Dr. Begay and Mr. Charlie, for sharing your wisdom with us. We will be back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock Pacific for our first session, which will be FEWS Systems on the Navajo Nation. And that is a panel discussion moderated by Dr. Carlotta Chief. And we're going to discuss investigating and communicating nature and science in society with panelists from NTUA, Native Renewables, Dine College Land Grant Office, and Tulani Lake Farms. So it is the same Zoom link for everyone who will be able to join us. And I thank you for your participation today. Have a good afternoon.